John Lynch was with his pre-draft remarks press conference on the 2024 draft class, how many first-round grades they have, how it could impact how they maneuver the draft on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and the Brandon Aiyuk negotiations. All that and more coming up right now.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We love the everydayers, and we love it when you hit that subscribe button on YouTube and everywhere you listen to your podcast. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. All right, Croc. John Lynch speaking at the podium with reporters pre-draft 2024 and said some interesting things. I think how we have to start, though, with the Brandon Aiyuk stuff, just because that's something that's kind of been a cloud over the offseason. And I think those types of things will quiet down once the draft comes and goes and Brandon Aiyuk is not traded. And John Lynch said he was not trying to trade Brandon Aiyuk. And John Lynch said, in fact, that he wants Brandon Aiyuk to be a career San Francisco 49ers and that they've had some good talks, but he wouldn't go into any further details on that and said he wanted to keep those conversations and all those negotiations private. He did say one thing about the Aiyuk negotiations and said he wouldn't mind getting things done with him a little sooner than they've gotten it done with some other guys. It's not really the blueprint necessarily for the 49ers to wait until the very last minute to get these big contracts done in the summertime.
They also, someone asked him straight up, like, is there any chance he's traded come draft time? And his response was, I don't foresee that happening, but he did not say no.
He wasn't as adamant. Remember, they asked that question about Nick Bosa, and he had a different answer. He was like, no way in hell that's happening, right? He didn't quite say that about Brandon Aiyuk, but did say he wanted him to be a career San Francisco 49er. And he also abruptly ended the questioning on Brandon Aiyuk when someone said, and he already said he wasn't going to speak about it, but someone said, have you allowed Brandon Aiyuk and his agents to seek a trade? And he's like, not going to comment on those things. Not going to comment anymore about the Brandon Aiyuk stuff, And I wouldn't have expected him to say anything about it, but that question, but he kind of did talk around things with other questions. That question he did not want to answer. So
there's no way to dance around that. Like how can you dance around that? Like unless you just deliberately lie to people.
He just said they get a lot of calls about a lot of things. Like teams have called about Brandon Aiyuk. The question is, has he entertained those calls? Which is what we don't know now. Listening to this press conference, knowing how things have gone this offseason, Croc, do you find it more or less likely that Brandon Aiyuk gets traded during the draft?
I still keep it at the 10% that I fell on, a month ago, a month and a half ago or so, when we talked about the chance that he get released. Well, there were three different options. There was not released, traded, but there were three different options. He gets signed before the season starts, plays on a 5th-year option, gets traded. And I gave it like a 70% chance he gets a new contract. You thought it would be lower than that. I gave it like a 20% chance he plays on the 5th-year option, obviously a huge possibility. And then the 10% chance is saying, you never know. And I still feel that same way, because I do think it would have to be an offer that sweeps John Lynch and the 49ers off of their feet, a la the DeForest Buckner trade, where it's like, you're going to give us pick 13 overall? Because a lot of times you got to think about it like this. A lot of times with these trades, especially like player and all that, a lot of times you don't know what the pick is going to be at the time of the trade. A lot of times.
Right. If you did a mid-season trade, you don't know where that pick is going to lie.
Right. And this one, like, you knew, it's pick 13 overall. And it's really hard to shut that down, being able to not just, you don't want to move on from a player, but be able to kind of reset the money or the books or whatever, right? To get a player that's younger and all right, like let's continue to kind of just build. You got a lot of good players. And they did it with Buckner. And I will say, as much as it didn't hit from the standpoint of Kinlaw being this great player, 49ers been to 3 straight NFC championship games after that trade, right? Like they had the 1 year where it was weird, COVID, didn't make the playoffs, a lot of injuries. But after that, you went to 3 straight NFC championship games and the Super Bowl. So obviously you would love to have DeForest Buckner as a 49er. And there's clear areas where he could help the Niners. But when you look back on the decision to do it, I don't think it helped the 49ers. I don't think it really hurt the 49ers.
What would that offer have to be? John Lynch said something very interesting that could very much impact their draft plans. And I don't think it's necessarily shocking, just given what we already know about most drafts, what we know about this draft class. But John Lynch said that the 49ers had 22 first-round grades. Now, does that mean we can expect that if the 49ers trade Brandon Aiyuk, it's probably one of the top 22 picks in the first round that's coming back, plus maybe something else? That's got to be the asking price, right? Because if you're trading Brandon Aiyuk, you're probably not going to trade him for a second-round pick, which essentially is what the 49ers have at pick 31. John Lynch just told us unless one of those 22 players that he has first-round grades isn't the same 22 that other teams have, and one of those guys falls down to pick 31 or later when another team's on the clock and maybe offers to trade for Brandon Aiyuk on the clock when something like that's happening. So as far as we'll talk about draft trades as well, but just Brandon Aiyuk trades, I think there's a little hint that if the 49ers were to trade Brandon Aiyuk, it's probably going to be one of the first 22 picks in the first round.
Well, I'll say this. Yes, they have only so many first round grades on guys, but he also threw a little nugget out there. They have more guys that they've labeled as starters. So, like, you have to kind of look at it from that perspective, which I never have. It's just, we just always hear first round grade, second round grade, third round grade. He threw out when talking about the whole, fall back on the NIL and how some players are going back, and you can kind of go more into detail about that. You had a really good tweet about it. But in those players that he had scouted, 85 players or whatever, and so many grades, you threw out the amount of starters he felt. So even though we view first round, those are guys, heck, in the second round, they're still identifying certain guys as starters. So let's say you do trade Aiyuk for pick 26. He's still able to get a guy that he feels is a starter for the 49ers.
He said, yeah. So, and generally, and it's not always like this, but generally teams believe they're trying to draft starting caliber players in the first 3 rounds of the draft. And, once you start to get to those comp picks late round 3, I don't know if it's necessarily the case. We heard, basically last year, Kyle Shanahan, when they drafted a kicker, right? When they drafted Jake Moody, they're like, it's basically a 4th round pick anyway. So I think, like the starting grades are probably gone once you start getting to the 90s and 100s in the draft. And now you're looking more at special teamers. You're looking more at backup players that you hope can become starters and those types of players. And that's where the 49ers have really shined and been really good drafting those guys. And they've been kind of bad at the end of the 3rd round, probably because they're chasing those starting caliber traits, but they're drafting players that, didn't live up to those traits and continue to not live up to those starting caliber traits once they're in the NFL. So it really affects the late rounds, essentially, with those prospects going back. I've got the numbers here from what John Lynch said, and to be honest with you, this is the most interesting part of the press conference, and it doesn't affect just the 49ers, and it affects the entire league and how things are going right now in the NFL versus college football, the NIL stuff, and the strength of this draft class and the weakness of this draft class, which might be the day 3 depth. So we'll get into that next and what trade possibilities might loom for the San Francisco 49ers in the non-Brandon Aiyuk category next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. I know baseball's in full swing too, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single one of those games. But how about those draft props, man? And it is the best way to play and probably the best way to make some links. I think if you are a well-informed football fan and draft fan, I think you can find some really good I think you can beat the house in a lot of ways versus how much more difficult it is to do that with betting on one game or betting on something throughout the year. I think NFL draft props is the best way to make a little cash. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150. Win or lose on your first bet. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks to the NFL draft, all on an app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Today's episode is also brought to you by Monopoly Go. We've all been there, either as a player or as a fan. It's halftime. The scoreboard's not looking good. You're feeling low. You're not sure if you or your team can pull out a win. That's when you dig deep, you lift your head up, and you say to yourself, it's time to get back in the game, pull off some bank heists, and take as much money from my friends as I possibly can. That's right. The smash hit mobile game Monopoly Go lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empire. It's the Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with tons of new twists, including leaderboards to compare your progress to your buddies. You can even work with your friends and crack open community chess and win tournaments and get extra rewards and climb the leaderboards. But you can also knock down their landmarks with a wrecking ball or charge your buddies rent on all the classic Monopoly iconic properties. So get back out there, put your game face on, and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. So, Croc, about some of the grades that the 49ers had in the fall and players that actually ended up going back to school. This is fascinating to me. The 49ers had 83 total draftable prospects that went back to school, 35 of those with starting grades that went back to school. So we're talking, probably day 2 or first round grades, prospects that went back to school. And John Lynch said that there's about 170 draftable players left in this class. Well, that's only 5 rounds worth of prospects. Now, some of the guys that are those 170 will probably filter down to round 6, round 7. Who knows? Maybe the 49ers, with all of their picks, would still get one of those 170 players. But I think this goes for every team in the league. And a lot of people hit me up and they're like, well, that means the 49ers are probably going to trade out. Well, are other teams? I don't know if other teams are going to see it differently. Other teams might not want to be trading for those picks either, knowing that they might not get draftable players this year versus other years because of how few underclassmen declared for this draft. So I find that fascinating. And 22 first round grades, 170 total draftable grades, Croc. And he also mentioned that there are 16 gold helmet players in this draft. And those are players that could be in any round, players that they love, that meet the criteria of what they want a San Francisco 49er football player to be. Someone like Colton McKivitz, for example, was a gold helmet player, even though he was drafted in the 5th round. I
think Hufanga,
I think a lot of players they end up drafting are that way. I'm pretty sure Trey Lance was a gold helmet player. I'm trying to think of others that I remember were for sure gold helmet players.
Jair Brown, I think, was a gold helmet player. Yeah, you're right. So there's going to be some gold helmet players drafted. There's 16 of them in this class, Croc. What do you think all of this means for draft day trades? Do you think the 49ers are likely to go up, whether it's a Brandon Aiyuk trade or packaging some picks to go up and get one of their first round grades in round 1? Again, I like to do the percentages, right? And if you look at the 49ers and what they've done over the entirety of their tenure with this staff, they move around, right? You look at the very first draft. They didn't stay pat at 2. They traded back to 3. Then they traded up to get Reuben Foster, right? We've seen them do that consistently. Heck, they even traded out of the pick that was Alvin Kamara, and then they ended up drafting the Keller Witherspoon after that, then traded up for CJ Beathard. And I feel like there's only been one draft where it was like, you felt like, if there's one thing we know that's going to happen is the 49ers are going to do several trades. They had zero movement in the draft. That was a couple years ago. But yeah, I expect a lot of movement. And if there's a guy that they identified, this was a good thing that he said as well. And that I think maybe some people probably glossed over when talking about identifying players and, our players, they like and whatnot. They said, if there's a player we like, we draft him. And we don't care if the rest of the league has this guy somewhere else and maybe not draftable or a third-round pick. If we like a guy, we draft him. So that lets you know right there. If there's somebody that may be sliding a little bit, it's like, all right, okay, he's up pick 22 and we're at 31. We need to move up so we could draft the guy that we like.
What do you think the odds are since you're a percentages guy? What is the percentage chance that no matter if it's true or not, John Lynch in his post-draft press conference says that at pick 31, they got one of those 22 first-round grades?
99%. Nothing is ever guaranteed, so we'll leave 1% for that, kind of like him to say something else. But he's going to get his guy.
Luke says in the chat, if a top left tackle falls to the mid-20s, it would be nuts not to attempt a trade up. Let's pull up the chart, Croc. I do have the chart handy.
Well, not only pull up the chart, but a top left tackle according to who?
Well, if it's according to the 49ers draft board.
Okay.
But Luke's top left tackle might be different than what the 49ers have as one of their 22 on their draft board, or what our big board looks like, Croc, that we hammered out, by the way, on OT with BP at the end of last week. We're going to do a little mock draft later Monday for the Tuesday morning pod. It'll be on YouTube up Monday evening, though, and kind of do a little mock draft based on our own draft board. Croc.
And there are good like this is a deep tackle class, but when you're looking for something specific,
yes,
like with your guy, that may look different. So when he said that, the first thing that came into my mind, Peacock and I have been a little bit indifferent on Rosengarten. And I'm not saying he's a guy who was drafted at 31, but I could see why the 49ers would potentially like Rosengarten as a prospect. Now, you may think he's a late day two guy, right? Third round pick. You may think he's tail end of the first round. But if the 49ers say, okay, we identify Rosengarten as a guy that fits what we want to do. He's a gold star guy. You see some little nastiness in his game. He moves well. Okay, we'll take him at 31, and we don't care if Peacock sees him as a third-round pick. So, again, when you say top tackles, you still got it according to who.
And like I just mentioned with the, what percentage chance is John Lynch going to say they got a first-round grade at pick 31 is probably unlikely, because most of these teams probably have a very similar number of guys, and a lot of them are the same guys, give or take one or two on different draft boards. So one team might have 20, one team might have 25, another team might have 17, 18, 19 first round grades. It's very likely that those players are going to fall to 31. So that's when you open it up to the next group of prospects. And if Rosengarten is one of those groups of prospects, I wouldn't be shocked at all. Right. And so that's kind of where you're at. You're in a new tier of prospect, most likely at 31, and not drafting from one of those 22 clean first round grades. Now, let's bring up the old chart, Crocky. I'm going to try to zoom it in so the folks can see the picture I brought up a second ago was not quite big enough, I think. All right, here we go. So that is the old Jimmy Johnson trade chart. Zoom in even a little bit more so the folks can see. The 49ers picks are highlighted. Pick 31 is worth 600 points. If the 49ers wanted to get to, let's say, 21, since that's the spot that we've talked about a lot with the Miami Dolphins, they would have clearly one of their 22 first-round grades, give or take one or two extra guys maybe that slides past Philadelphia. I don't know if the Philadelphia Eagles would want to move around with the 49ers anyway. So Niners go up.
Hey, business is business. I think they'd be willing to do it. Yeah, I watched the 49ers trade with the Seattle Seahawks.
And to be honest with you, Eagles probably one of the most likely teams to trade up, so it might not be them with pick 22 in the end anyway. So let's say they need to get 800. So they need 200 points. Well, the third round pick's worth 124, right? And that is Actually, you know what? Let's go to the Rich Hill chart, because the Rich Hill chart is more accurate based on actual trades that have happened in the NFL. So hold on, let me bring up this different screen here. Here we go. Rich Hill trade chart. And according to the Rich Hill trade chart, let's get San Francisco's stuff up here. By the way, this is DraftTech. I love their draft board because you can put in your team that you want to look at, and it'll highlight what their picks are. So here's the 49ers 10 picks. Pick 31 is worth 190 on the Rich Hill chart. So the difference with 21 up there at the Miami Dolphins, so that's 261. So the 49ers would need 71 points to get up there. Their pick 94 in round 3 is worth 41 points, so that's not going to get you there. But you could add one of those 4th round picks and start to get pretty close to what it would cost, a 3rd and a 4th maybe, to go up to number 21 if a team was willing to move down. Like, let's say the Miami Dolphins had 20 first round grades and they're all gone. So they might be willing to move down. And the 2nd round pick would probably get it done. Would the 49ers be willing to give up number 63? I'd probably say no, they shouldn't do that. But I'd be definitely willing to start looking at pick 94 to get up there to get one of those clean first round players, whoever that player might be, especially if the need meets the value. So it's definitely something doable that the 49ers could get up into that 22-ish range. And, who knows? I'm sure not exactly 22 of all their 22 first round grades will go in order, give or take what quarterbacks they think are actually first round grades or not. Maybe Minnesota at 23, Dallas at 24, Green Bay at 25, Tampa at 26. Could that be it and be even easier to get up? Like if their last first round grades a player they really like and he's on the board at pick 26, you have to believe John Lynch is on the phone trying to move up and go up 5 spots, because it shouldn't be prohibitively expensive to do so.
Right.
Next, I want to talk a little bit more about the 22 first round grades, about what the 49ers draft plans are, and what we learned from John Lynch at his pre-draft press conference. Next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. We're talking about last-minute deals up to 60% savings by buying those last-minute sports, concerts, comedy, theater tickets. Yeah, it's not just sporting tickets either. You can get Major League Baseball tickets up to an hour after first pitch, just like you can with concerts, comedy, and any events near you that you need tickets for. So take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. It's a new code. Again, terms apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Okay, Croc. 35 starting grades went back to school. 22 first round grades. 170 draftable players in total. 16 gold helmets. Those are the key figures that John Lynch put out there during his pre-draft press conference. I think you have to have the offers, right, to move down.
And that had never been clearer to me than listening to Mayock talk about trying to move up and move back, and how there were times where they tried and they just couldn't do it. Like, just nobody wanted to trade up. They're trying to trade back out of this spot. They didn't value the player as high as they were picking, and they just couldn't do it.
And it's something to remember, because this happens a lot when we're doing mock drafts where it's like, oh, got to trade back. Well, it's like, sure, but a team has to make that offer. And sometimes you're sitting there for 15 minutes or 10 minutes, or however long your clock is to make your pick. The phone doesn't ring. You got to make a pick, right? You might not get that offer to move up. And maybe the offer you get is some team trying to, get one over on you and not really giving you any kind of value, and it's not worth moving down at all. So you might have to stick and pick at 31. But I think the 49ers are in a place where, And he said he does. John Lynch did say he expects to get some calls with teams saying, "Hey, if this or this happens, we might be looking to come up on draft night." So kind of getting some cursory trade possibilities going, so things are quick and easy once teams are on the clock. I think it's probably 50% chance, Croc. I would say, if we're doing percentages, 50% chance the 49ers stay at 31 and make a pick. And then I'd say it's probably a 25% chance they either go up to get one of those 22 first round grades or go back because they're going to be drafting from the same tier anyway, and another team wants to come up in the end of the first round and make a deal, and they move back and they're still drafting from the same tier of player that they would have drafted from at pick 31.
I don't like how you did that. I feel like you took the easy way out.
You mean that. You don't like how I was 100% correct about everything I said?
Yes. Yeah. I don't like how you did that.
Right. I know it added up to 100%. What percentages did you not like, Croc?
Like, it's 50-50. That's the easy thing to say.
What is it, 53% that they stay? I think it's always more likely that you don't trade than you do. Because most picks are not traded. I
think in the 49ers case, it's more likely that they trade their first round pick. Okay, let's just 2017. Did they trade the first round pick?
Yes, twice.
2018, they stayed pat. They drafted McGlinchey. 19, they weren't moving. They drafted Bosa.
Yeah.
20, they As a matter of fact, first of all, 2017, they traded twice in the first round.
Yeah.
Or to get into the first round. 20 was the Aiyuk pick. They traded twice in the first round. They traded back and drafted Kinlaw. They traded up and drafted Aiyuk. And then 2021, they traded up to get Trey Lance. So history shows they are far more likely to trade up or back in the first round. So that 50-50 thing you just tried to do, I'm not letting that slide. I think God bumped that number up.
Oh, all right. Let's do it. Let's do a friendly wager.
Let's do it.
It's just, do they trade pick 31 or not?
Let's do. Okay.
I'm going to say no then, because you think it's more than 50%. So you think it's more likely they trade it. I think it's less likely they trade it. So what's our bet? Let us know. In the chat. Let's think about this. Let us know in the chat if you have any ideas what we should bet. I'm not wearing a Dodgers jersey. Croc's not wearing a Warriors jersey. Nothing like that. I'm not buying a jersey, first of all, so I can wear it for a bet either. I wouldn't mind buying something for Croc to utilize that he wants, but no, we're not doing this. We're not eating anything gross either, so that's not happening. And here's another thing. They've been more aggressive going up than back. The times they've gone back, they only went back exactly one pick both times. They went from 2 to 3 in 2017, and they went from 13 to 14 in 2020.
Yeah, and so moving up is like,
yeah,
they had to move up.
Mm-hmm. You were more.
So now we could do the percentages. I think it's like 65% chance they trade the pick.
They trade it, okay.
And then
so of that remaining 35%, is it up or back?
I think it's up. And
65-35 that they're staying or going up, and 0% they're going back.
I think the chances of them going back are much slimmer. I think they're trading up for a guy that they really want, and they don't necessarily care to be picking at 31. I think they want to trade up. As a matter of fact, I'll even put it into the top between 20 and 25.
20 to 25. They traded from exactly 31 to 25 to get Brandon Aiyuk. I think that type of deal they could do. They just need a dance partner.
Now, it also made a lot of sense with the Aiyuk trade, because in the trade back for and they kind of did this 2017 as well, but in the trade back from 13 to 14, they got that extra third, and then they used that to move up to get Brandon Aiyuk.
Being Butterfly in the chat says the only way they stay at 31 is if a player falls down. Well, that's the tough part, because
if the player falls, they're going to want to move up and get him.
Right. And they don't know if a player is going to fall down, because a player can fall down and then get picked at 30 and he didn't get the 31. And then you might not have an offer to go down from 31. So you have to pick a player there. You have to be prepared to pick.
And also they could try to trade up, right? They can have Eric Crocker's thoughts in mind and, hey, we want to trade up. Remember with Reuben Foster, they started making phone calls in the teens and nobody would trade with them.
Yeah.
Like they were trying to move up to get Foster.
Spent even more to go even further up to make that pick. And teams wouldn't let them do it because they couldn't come up with the trade. And there's more conversations about trades that don't happen that do, right? So it takes two to tango. A team has to be willing to take what the 49ers are willing to offer for the Niners to go up, and a team has to call them to give them what's worth moving down if the 49ers are on the clock at 31 and are willing to go down. I think it's usually more likely that I think most teams are pretty open to the idea of moving down most of the time and don't get the offers. I think that's generally what's happening on draft day when teams are before they make their pick. And sometimes there's no chance. They're like, oh, we got our guy here. No way we're moving out of this pick. But most teams are waiting for that phone to ring before they make that selection.
Well, because as you're looking at the guys that are kind of coming down, there are probably 4 or 5 guys that we realistically feel like we would draft at this spot and really like. So why would we trade up to go get one of those guys? But then once you start seeing guys fly off the board, like the 49ers with Brandon Aiyuk, what was it, 5-6 receivers taken before Aiyuk? If you want that guy, they're starting to fly off the board. So it's like, okay, now we have to trade up.
And we'll leave with this one. RDC has a good point. QB needy teams will want to trade up to 31. No, I have no idea. We always say that every year, and it kind of doesn't happen. Last year, a team did move up for Levis, but it was on day 2, and it wasn't to get into round 1. The quarterbacks are interesting, though. The 49ers, and we should be rooting for as many quarterbacks to go as possible, or for a team to want to trade up to 31 to get a quarterback. Because if, say, 6 quarterbacks go in round 1, I'm sure there's not 6 quarterbacks that are part of those 22 first-round grades that the 49ers gave out, right? So the more quarterbacks, the better. We're rooting for Bo Nix to go to the Broncos at pick 12, right? We're rooting for Michael Penix. We're rooting for teams to trade up into the first round, or maybe even offer to the 49ers to go up and get a quarterback. The more quarterbacks to go is better for the San Francisco 49ers for sure. I have my doubts of more than 4, though, actually go in the first 32 picks.
And what for? Just Williams, McCarthy, Daniels,
and May.
I
think
so
those.
You're saying Bo Nix and Penix.
I would be willing to bet. We just did an over/under episode looking at draft props on the Peacock and Williamson show on Monday. So guys, go check that out if you want. And Bo Nix is 32.5 is the over/under on what pick he gets selected. I think he goes way over that, meaning later, a higher numbered pick. So I think my guess is that Bo Nix, and maybe I have Penix a little higher, but maybe even Penix too, are drafted closer to round 3 than round 1. That's what I think.
And Peacock, one thing that didn't happen in the press conference, we didn't hear it, it wasn't talked about. No farts from John Lynch.
So here's the question. Did Trent Ball, and you guys got to go see the video if you haven't seen it. Trent Baalke let one rip during the press conference for the Jaguars in his pre-draft presser. And props to Baalke, first of all, for just, no pun intended, blowing right through it. Right? He didn't stop. He said, "Excuse me," kept going. Like dang, that guy's good at not stopping. And then second of all, Croc, and this is the big one to me, is did Jim Tomsula get framed? Because everyone blames the 49ers fart press conference years ago on Tomsula. Baalke was there too. Did Baalke frame Tomsula back in 2016?
I think Baalke is a little gassy. The fact that, so with the Tomsula thing, we all assume he let one rip. We think he let one rip, but we don't know for certain. It could have just been a random noise. Trent Baalke let one rip and then said, "Excuse me." Bro said, "Excuse me." That was that. I've been laughing about that for days now.
One thing we can all be glad about is this no longer the Trent Baalke era, and it is the John Lynch era with the San Francisco 49ers. Things have gone much better since. All right. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen. Croc and I back Monday night on YouTube, Tuesday morning for your listening pleasure on the audio pods. We're going to do a little mock draft utilizing our own now official Locked On 49ers big board. Talk to you then right here, Locked On 49ers.
Excuse me.
Man, I think somewhere in there, he said we're going to run the football.